Elder Scrolls vampirism was never a curse someone caught, it was a debt someone paid. A father once traded 1,000 souls for immortal power, and 2 of those souls belonged to his own wife and daughter, handed over without a single word asked. Every fang and every red eye since then has been drawing from that same ledger, and the account is still open. Molag Bal and vampires, 1,000 souls. That's what Lord Harkon paid to become a vampire, and every single one of them belonged to somebody else. Everybody knows Elder Scrolls vampires. The glowing eyes, the sun allergy, the sudden urge to monologue in a cave. Nobody stops to ask who's cashing the check. Vampirism isn't just a disease in this world, it's a Daedric contract, and the guy holding the pen is Molag Bal, credited across the lore as the literal father of vampirism itself. The surface explanation is simple. You get bitten, you get cursed, you get fangs. The actual mechanism is worse. In-universe texts describe the affliction as a soul curse, one that binds the victim's soul directly to Molag Bal's domination. Regular death doesn't cancel the subscription. You don't escape him by dying, because dying was never the exit. It was the delivery method. Harkon understood this better than anyone. To become a vampire lord, he didn't just accept a bite. He orchestrated a ritual and fed Molag Bal 1,000 souls, framing the whole grotesque transaction as a gift rather than a theft. And as a reward for that slaughter, Molag Bal handed pure-blood vampirism to Harkon himself, and to his wife and his daughter, Serena, both remade as daughters of Cold Harbor through a ritual soaked in domination and violation dressed up as a gift. That's a father buying his own family's transformation with 1,000 strangers' lives and calling it generosity. Cults across the setting still petition Molag Bal directly, trading mass sacrifice for a taste of his power, and fans argue endlessly about whether every strain traces back to one original curse or 1,000 separate bargains. The pattern says otherwise. Nearly every canonical bloodline leads back to the same prince, which means vampirism was never really a disease. It was a recruitment drive, and Molag Bal keeps every soul that signs up, forever. Harkon at least had to give something up to get what he wanted, but there's an artifact in this world that takes without asking, and what it steals isn't your soul or your blood. It's the version of you that lives behind your eyes. Vermina's Skull of Corruption. Molag Bal wants your soul, but Vermina figured out something worse. Why bother stealing a soul when you can turn it into the weapon that kills its own owner? The Skull of Corruption looks like a joke compared to the King of Rape's resume. No armies, no 1,000 soul contracts, just a staff. But that staff does something none of Molag Bal's schemes ever attempt directly. It reaches into a victim's mind, pulls out a corrupted copy of them, and sends it back in to finish the job. The mechanic is simple and it is disgusting. The skull feeds on dreams. It takes a person's fears, their memories, their entire sense of who they are, and compresses it into a projectile made of psychic torment. Pointed at someone, and their own identity comes back at them wearing their face. Not a monster, not a demon. Them, but wrong. Use it once and the target just gets hurt. Use it again on the same person and the damage compounds because the skull is learning them, getting more precise, better at finding the exact fracture point in someone's mind. Survivors describe night terrors that don't fade after the fight ends, dreams that stay vivid for weeks, paranoia that doesn't lift. Some victims reach a point where they can no longer tell their own allies from the copies that were hunting them. Imagine fighting yourself over and over until you're not sure who's actually standing next to you anymore. Molag Bal, at least, has to take something from you. Vermina just points, and your own mind does the dismantling for her. That's the part fans rarely credit her for. She's not flashy, she doesn't need armies or bargains. Nothing in canon spells this out directly, but the pattern is hard to miss. The skull doesn't invent a weapon out of nothing. It just proves the most dangerous thing in the room was always you. One artifact, one victim at a time, is a horror you can at least run from. But there's a ritual in this world where thousands of people volunteer to lose themselves at once, and the survivors made a rule never to discuss it. The Wild Hunt, the skull needed a wielder to dismantle a person from the inside. The Wood Elves figured out how to skip the middleman entirely. It's called the Wild Hunt, and it is the single most terrifying thing about Bosmeri culture, mostly because they'd rather you didn't know it exists. This is not a metaphor. This is thousands of Wood Elves simultaneously discarding their own humanoid forms and becoming something else. Not soldiers, not warriors. A pack of shifting forest demons and animal gods, thousands strong, tearing across the landscape like the land itself declared war. And when the hunt moves, it does not check IDs. It sweeps through the countryside, killing everything in its path. soldiers, civilians, livestock, wildlife, it makes zero distinction. The Green Pact already governs Bosmeri life with brutal, uncompromising rules. The Wild Hunt is what happens when that religion stops asking politely and starts ending things. It is summoned only in the most extreme circumstances, which tells you everything about how bad things had to get before an entire nation agreed to unmake itself on purpose. The last confirmed Wild Hunt happened sometime in the late Second Era. That's it, that's the whole citation. Historians call the records vaguely attested. Nobody agrees on the location. The Bosmer treat the entire subject as taboo, the kind of silence you only get when a culture would genuinely prefer the world forget something happened. Here's the part that should bother you more than the killing. Eyewitness accounts agree that once the transformation takes hold, the hunters lose stable identity. They become pure predation in motion, shapes without a self behind them, until the event burns itself out. Nothing in the historical record confirms how many of them ever walked back out as themselves, and that silence is doing a lot of work. Fans still argue about whether this is heroism or a war crime with extra steps. Both readings survive contact with the evidence, which is exactly why nobody's settled it. At least the hunters knew what they were becoming. But there were three figures worshipped as living gods for centuries, who built their entire divinity on a lie, and their followers died defending it without ever being told the truth. The tribunal's true nature. 3 people in Morrowind get worshipped as living gods, and not one of them was born that way. That's the part temple doctrine skips. Almalexia, Sothasil, and Vivek didn't ascend through virtue or bloodline. They found a heart, literally an actual beating heart, left behind by a dead god called Lorcan, and they used it to siphon divine power directly into their own bodies. No prophecy, no trial, just theft with excellent branding. Before that, they had a friend named Nerevar. He led them, trusted them, and made a pact with them not to touch the heart's power for exactly this reason. Then he ended up dead, the heart got used anyway, and the 3 people standing closest to the body walked away as gods. Morrowind was never told to ask questions about the timing. It was told to build temples for a few hundred years the official story holds. Vivek is a savior. Almalexia is a mother figure. Sothasil is a wise recluse tinkering in a hidden city. Meanwhile, the actual documentation tells a different story. Dissenting texts describe a regime that hunted down rival scripture, punished doubt, and quietly rewrote its own founding myth every time someone got close to the truth. This isn't corruption creeping into a good system later. The system was built on the murder from day one, and everything after that was just maintenance on the cover-up. That's the same move as everything else in this video. Minus the prince, minus the curse, minus the ritual chanting, no Daedra required. Just 3 mortals who realized the only thing standing between them and godhood was somebody else's soul and a willingness to lie about it forever. And the lie has an expiration date. The heart isn't a metaphor, it's a battery, and batteries fail. Disrupt it, and the tribunal's power doesn't dim. It evaporates, because there was never anything underneath it except the theft itself. Take that away, and you're left with 3 increasingly desperate mortals who spent centuries being worshipped by people who never got a vote on any of it, the same way a daughter never got a vote when her own father decided her soul was a bargaining chip. Rewriting history at least requires you to know what the truth was. But there's a realm in this world where the torment isn't a lie you're told, it's a treatment plan, and the people inside it are never allowed to finish recovering. Sheogorath's Asylum of Madness. Sheogorath will make you laugh, hand you a cheese wheel, and let you smack a god unconscious with a giant fork. That is the whole marketing pitch. What it leaves out is that the Shivering Isles is a working facility, and the product it manufactures is broken minds. The realm is split into 2 halves, mania and dementia, and that split is not decoration. It is a diagnosis turned into a zip code. One side runs on euphoria and delusion, the other on despair and paranoia, and every law, every quest, every NPC conversation is engineered to keep residents locked inside whichever half fits them best. People are not visiting this place. They are being sorted. The trials are where it gets specific. Citizens get dragged through arbitrary laws that change based on Sheogorath's mood, surreal punishments for imaginary crimes, and tasks built around whatever a person is already afraid of. This is not one blanket curse dropped on an entire population the way you might expect from a Prince of Madness. It is individualized, bespoke, somewhere between a haunted house and a subscription service, except you never signed up and you can never cancel. That is the turn, and it is worse than the tribunal ever managed. 3 mortals ascended to godhood off 1 dead heart and got worshipped for the theft. Sheogorath skipped the theft entirely and built infrastructure. He does not need to take a soul once. He runs a facility that keeps producing the exact damage he wants, per victim, indefinitely, and calls it a kingdom. Some inhabitants cycle through breakdown, and something that looks like recovery, over and over, because the environment itself never lets the wound close. Nobody heals in the Shivering Isles, they just get scheduled for the next episode. Somewhere in that machine is someone who just wanted to stop being afraid, or stop losing the people they loved, and instead got assigned a permanent role in someone else's amusement. The fandom actually argues about this, and the argument matters. Plenty of players clock Sheogorath as the funny one, the meme prince, the guy who turns your head into a pumpkin as a bit. Others point out that a comedic tone wrapped around industrialized psychological torture is not a contradiction. It is the trap working exactly as designed. The jokes are the reason nobody calls it what it is. A realm built to break minds at least needs a prince and a plane of oblivion to run it. But one woman in a single house with a knife and her own children produced something that has outlived every god in this story. The Night Mother's origin. No plane of oblivion, no prince, no thousand-soul contract, just one house, one woman, and a knife. Sheogorath needed an entire realm to manufacture suffering at scale. This one didn't need a realm at all. It needed a mother who decided her children's souls were hers to spend, and a floor that could hide the evidence. The story goes like this. A Dunmer woman, name lost to history, murdered her own children inside her home, and then took her own life, offering all of it to Sithis as a blood sacrifice. She didn't dump the bodies, she hid them in the walls and under the floorboards, like she wanted the house itself to keep the secret. And for weeks, the neighbors heard something, scratching, crying, coming from inside walls that were supposedly empty. When someone finally forced their way in, the house was abandoned, covered in blood. Nobody home, nobody alive, and no clean explanation for the noises everyone swore they'd heard for a month straight. That's the part that should bother you more than the murders themselves. The sacrifice wasn't just committed, it was accepted, and something on the other end stayed quiet inside those walls long enough for the whole neighborhood to notice. Then absolutely nothing happens for roughly 30 years. 30 years. Not a haunting, not a curse, not a single reported incident tying back to that house. Then some unnamed man starts hearing a voice in his head, calm and comforting, telling him she's the Night Mother, and that he's her first listener. He doesn't run from it. He builds an entire assassin's guild around it, one that still exists, still kills, still answers to Sithis through her. A domestic murder in an unremarkable house became the founding scripture of a cult that operates across the whole continent. Fans argue constantly over whether this is even the real origin, since the setting hands you multiple competing versions and never picks one. Some read the mother story as propaganda, a myth built after the fact to give the Brotherhood a clean legend. Others take it as gospel because thematically it's just too perfect to be an accident. Either way, nobody explains the gap. Nobody explains why the voice waited 3 decades to recruit unless waiting was the entire point, unless something was still being processed in there long after the blood dried. That was a woman who thought she was handing her children to something greater than herself. But there's a killer in this story who never heard a voice, never made a bargain, and never had a god's permission at all, and he got away with it for years anyway, because the city he lived in had already decided which victims were even worth counting. The Butcher of Windhelm. No Daedric prince signed off on this one. No ancient pact, no cosmic bargain, no god whispering instructions in the dark. Just a man with a knife, a workspace, and years to work uninterrupted. That is what makes this the ugliest entry in the whole video. Windhelm is losing young women one at a time, and nobody can stop it. The bodies turn up mutilated, organs and body parts removed with obvious precision, arranged like the killer wanted them found that way. Guards patrol the same streets every night, residents whisper about who it could be, and still the killings continue, month after month, because nobody in a position to act is actually looking. When the trail finally gets followed, it leads somewhere that should have been checked from day one. A hidden workspace tucked inside the city, filled with anatomical diagrams, notes on the victims, and a blood-soaked altar that reads less like a crime scene and more like a laboratory. This was not a man losing control. This was a man with a filing system. That is the detail that should terrify you more than the mutilations. Serial killers who get away with it for years are not lucky. They are organized, patient, and invisible to the people who should be watching, and Windhelm handed this one all 3 conditions for free. Because the real failure here is not the killer. It is the city. Guards chase the obvious suspects instead of the real evidence. Political drama and social prejudice eat up attention that should have gone toward dead women. The city had motive, opportunity, and years of bodies, and it still could not organize itself enough to notice the pattern until a stranger walked in and did the job for them. Compare that to the Night Mother's followers, who at least believed they were serving something larger, a dark covenant with rules and purpose. The Butcher believed in nothing but himself, and Windhelm still could not be bothered to stop him. That is the thesis sharpening into its final shape. It was never really about how convincing the monster is. It is about how little effort anyone puts into stopping them once the victim stops mattering to the people in charge. Somewhere in this city, a young woman got up that morning wanting an ordinary life and got dismantled instead, while the institutions built to protect her looked at literally anything else. Fans still argue over whether this quest is Skyrim's darkest grounded moment or a plot that never got the depth it deserved. Either way, the horror was never really about the killer's identity. It was about how long a city can look away from a body count before that becomes a choice instead of an accident. A city that lets someone be dismantled and looks away is one failure, but there is a place in this story built entirely out of that failure, a copy of the world where looking away is not a mistake, it is the architecture, and everything you have heard so far has been feeding it. Cold Harbor Molag Bal has never conquered anything, and he doesn't need to. Every other horror in this story, the soul that survives death only to keep suffering, the artifact that erases the person wearing it, the culture that scrubbed its own name off the map, the gods who rewrote reality without asking permission, the asylum built to industrialize madness, the house that filed a murdered friend under acceptable losses, the city that chose comfort over one screaming voice, all of it was a rehearsal. Cold Harbor is the finished version. It is a twisted, ashen copy of Nirn, choked skies, and defiled buildings, like someone photocopied the mortal world and left it in acid. Souls dragged there through vampirism or cult worship do not just suffer, they get taken apart, piece by piece, until obedience is the only thing left standing where a person used to be. That is not incidental. That is the point. Molag Bal's actual goal has always been to drag entire chunks of Nirn into Cold Harbor and fuse them together, until the real world and his personal hell are the same place. He is not planning an invasion. He has been quietly building an annex, and that is where Serana stops being a side character and becomes the whole argument. Harkon offered his own daughter as part of a bargain for 1,000 souls, and made her immortal so that offer could never expire. She was not a payment, she was construction material, permanently on the books, because a soul that never dies is a soul that never stops being useful to whoever claims it. Follow that thread and the uncomfortable question answers itself. Molag Bal does not need mortals to hand over their souls because he is short on territory. He needs them because every willing sacrifice, every cult, every desperate bargain is another room built onto his realm using someone else's life as the material. The asylum, the house, the erased culture, the stolen godhood, they were never separate crimes. They were floor plans. Cold Harbor was just where the blueprint came from. Fans already call it the most existentially upsetting realm in the game for exactly this reason. Dagon can only burn a world down once. Molag Bal gets to keep it, forever, fully staffed. He never had to take Nirn by force. Mortals kept building his hell for him, one soul at a time and calling it a bargain. If you enjoyed this video and want to see more, click the video on the screen now.